join in, and then we'll get started. Okay, we are just about 30 seconds past the top of the hour. So welcome again, everyone. We have a great webinar for you today and a great group of presenters. Just a few housekeeping notes to start off with. We are recording today's webinar. We'll be sending a follow-up email to all of you with a link to the recording and slides. And if there is time, we will have a question and answer period at the end of the webinar using the Q&A function located in your toolbar. So please feel free to type in your questions at any time, and we will get to them at the end. Again, we have a great webinar for you. And to start, I'd like to send it over to Rick Stein for the introduction. Rick, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Joe. And good day, everyone. And thanks for joining us for our second installment this year of Top Trends in Fresh 2024. I always look forward to these discussions, and it's always enlightening. I'm Rick Stein with FMI. With me today will be Jonna and Kelly with Circana, and we hope to walk you through some additional insights on Top Trends in Fresh. Before I get into that, though, they've given me the opportunity to do an unabashed plug for our FMI event called Fresh Forward. I don't know how many of you know about this event, but it's a day and a half where we bring in senior leaders of both retail and supply chain and the value chain to have discussions on key topics. This year's topics, we'll be talking about sustainability and packaging. We'll be talking about artificial intelligence and technology. We'll also be talking about emerging consumer trends. This is just a quick list of folks that showed up last year. We already have a robust group of retailers signed up for this year. So I encourage you all to look at the website and maybe possibly attend. So let's move on to today. For our second installment, we like to do a brief overview of where current trends are in fresh. So we'll take a look at the year to date and some of the key drivers. And then we want to kind of take a look into pockets of potential and opportunities from a consumer perspective. So I'd like to turn it over to Jonna. And Jonna, why don't you take them through the first part, and maybe we'll have some time for some discussion. Thanks.
Absolutely. And I was the selfish one who had hoped that Rick would plug Fresh Forward, because I found it one of the most interesting conversations of last year. And it does happen between now and our next Top Trends in Fresh, which isn't until August 15th. So definitely good shout out to that event. So we're going to do something a little bit different to kick this Top Trends in Fresh off today. We're going to ask all of you to take a quick poll for us. How do you think 2024 is faring so far in terms of fresh food sales? Do you think that it's strong in that the fresh foods is winning and outpacing center store and other grocery departments, and it's at an all-time high? Do you think that it's flat and we're kind of starting out the new year a little sluggish? Or do you think it's actually in decline and we are starting to see center store and frozen do better in sales performance than the fresh foods departments? So give everyone a quick minute here to go ahead and enter your ideas. Now, you're coming to this event, so you probably want to know the answer. But before we show the answer, we thought we'd start with something fun like this. So I'm going to just give it a second to ensure that we get a robust amount of attendees jumping in here. Thank you all for your thoughts. And I got to ask, is there a way that we see the results? I have to ask. Is there a way if I hit next, do I get to see the results? All right, Kelly nodded, and she is the queen of my logistics here on this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next. And we do see that we have a split. Ooh, this is fun. We do more of these, guys. So 45% think that it's strong, that fresh growth in sales as we start the new year is outpacing, and that we're hitting all-time highs. An almost equal amount think it's flat. And then we only have about 12% or 13% that think it's declining. I love that result because I know in my chats with many of you and many of my colleagues, we've seen an even split. I've also seen a lot of folks who believe that fresh is doing gangbusters right now, and there's a lot of macro consumer trends that we'll talk about today, we talked about in the past, that would make you think that. But the reality in the actual sales numbers for year to date through April, fresh foods is flat. Now, sales growth is the absolute definition of flat, right? We're seeing about 0.1% dollar sales for total perishables. We're seeing a negative 1% in unit sales. But when we're talking about flatness, so to speak, is the way we framed it in that poll question, we really think about that left-hand side. So when we think about perishables, which in this view would exclude dairy, because it's the view of perishables that's produce, meat, deli, bakery, seafood, and floral, we see that perishables in pink is about 34% of total year-to-date store sales, or I should say food and beverage sales, and that we've had flat growth. Grocery is 61% of sales, and they've actually have receded ever so slightly some share to fresh. But again, we're about a third of sales, and our results are relatively flat. Now, of course, as we've talked about in Top Trends in Fresh, sales are going to be connected to the price that is happening, especially in light of inflation. We'll talk a lot about that in this news report today. Price per unit for perishables, in average for fresh, is about 1.6 from January to April of 2024 versus the prior year's period. Grocery has seen a higher rate of inflation, 1.8%. That is somewhat of what's driving grocery to have a stronger dollar change performance, but they're also seeing unit growth in a way that fresh isn't. So it really does lead us to kick today's conversation off with the same slide we entered last conversation on Top Trends in Fresh on, which is, we are not here to tell you that anything related to affordability, holistic health, premiumization, that consumers want to feel tailored and personalized and customizing the way they eat, shop, and behave, that fresh prepared isn't a major trend. All the trends on the left that we've been tracking for years are absolutely still valid. But the story is about the prism. Pandemic and the inflationary period has colored and changed and really reshaped the way that consumers are shopping and eating today. And I think, as we'll show, that's going to really have almost an outsized impact in fresh. In grocery, a lot of analytics, a lot of strategy, a lot of brands that are leading that strategy. So I do think, I'm not going to say that these trends wouldn't be impacting grocery as much as fresh. The reality, though, in fresh is we have a moment. And we covered that extensively in our last Top Trends of Fresh, which is linked there on the slide. We really have a moment to not just chase any one trend, to absolutely meet the moment and understand today as shoppers, their priorities. And I think we'll show you today that there's a lot of opportunity to either further that or even go well beyond. So that brings up dimensions of value. And these come from an FMI study with Circana that was released last year. But it is incredibly relevant that the quality, i.e. the attributes beyond the price that a product in fresh is offering, whether that be organic or sustainable packaging, or even just flavors and varieties that are surprise and delight people. That is quality as a tier. The word fresh has become bastardized. You've heard me say that before. Everyone's marketing on fresh. But what is the quality signal you're giving to the consumer is of vital importance today. Relevance and experience, I think you'll see a lot of that in what I'm going to cover. And then convenience. But convenience is something we've talked about a lot. I think what you're going to see in the news that I cover up front, as well as when Kelly talks about what the core shopper is looking for in fresh today, but beyond them, what is the other shoppers that we need to promote and have bigger opportunity with? It's about convenience can sometimes mean having an item in a store and available to them. Convenience can sometimes mean the packaging or the portion size, but really what it means is all four of these dimensions help someone evaluate, should I buy this product or that product? And when it comes to fresh, we often have sold as commodities. Hey, we're the freshest store and here's our apples. Or hey, we're the freshest store and look at our extensive meat case. In today's environment, we can't just have the same stuff and expect it to sell the same. We have to really think about these dimensions of value. They're not trends, they're literal dimensions of value. And I just want to plug again that FMI Circana study, which is about total food, incredibly relevant today. So let's jump into the consumer market landscape that's made these dimensions of value possible. First off, we measure at Circana every possible consumer retail segment. And food and beverage is the fourth from the top in this rank. Now, real quick, this is a rank of things both in traditional CPG, grocery, fresh foods retail, as well as in purple, general merchandise categories that extend far beyond our traditional grocery channels. What you see is that when it comes to top line dollar growth, the green circle, we are at about 6% growth in 2023 for total food and beverage. That puts us fourth in terms of total growth among all consumer retail segments. We are retracting, as we've covered extensively, unit declines though in food and beverage at retail. Now, you do see that there are many things consumers spend their money on that are retracting more in dollars and units, and the color of that is inflation. When folks maybe have less money to spend, which we know is absolutely both the perception and the reality for most American households, things like apparel, accessories, small appliances, and housewares become something that maybe you don't need as much or you delay the purchase on. You need food, which we all can agree to is why food is so important in this list. But what's so interesting, and I mentioned this in past times I've presented this slide, take a look at beauty, personal care, and especially that prestige beauty sector. We can live without beauty items. Certainly we can live without them being in the prestige channels, i.e. the premium sectors and experiences of that. We also actually are seeing stronger growth in pet than we are even in food and beverage total. All three of those categories, or areas I should say, that are outpacing retail food and beverage all have really made that dimensions of value more than about price. People want to still surprise, delight, and treat themselves or their pets and feel better about themselves in this heightened sense of both inflation and other macroeconomic trends. So I just love presenting this slide in this audience because the world of what consumers spend their money on is so much bigger than what goes on their plate for any one meal. And we are seeing elements that they will prioritize things that leave them with that value beyond price. So drilling further into food, this is a very busy slide, so let me take a minute to orient you on it. We're looking here at the two areas of US food and beverage, food service and retail. Prior slide was all just retail. When we look at that as a combined total US food and beverage of all of the sectors, both food service and retail, you do see that Q1 2023 was a really strong growth period. But by the time we got to the last quarter of last year, we were not growing in the macro total food perspective. Literally, quarter by quarter, we've not grown as fast in total food and beverage sales in America. Now, when we look at the quarter by quarter or total CAGR split, so each of these looks at each year, and then we've got our most recent quarters in the chart on the right. The top is retail, which we're diving into today. That is at-home consumption driven from the retail sector. At the bottom set of charts on the right, we have food service or away from home, which is where people are buying foods and beverages, not that they're eating at home. So think of that as restaurants, commercial food service, as well as things like cafeterias, colleges, theme parks, non-commercial as well. Now, what's been interesting in that is we're still seeing throughout all of these periods since 2020, 60+% of sales is happening at retail. And that still is as true in Q4 of 2023 as it was back, it's even greater now as Q4 2023 as it was in 2021. A lot of that is inflation and people not wanting to spend as much, and eating food at home is a way to save that money. But overarchingly, we definitely see that this next set of quarters and this next set of years, which doesn't have the pandemic and with which inflation isn't as immediate in sudden, we do really see that, we're going to need to have a retail-based reality, but food service is still in the game. When we think about not just dollars, but actual percentage of eating occasions, 86% of US meals are sourcing from the home. So again, prior slide was dollars and sales and spend. This is looking at actual occasions. And one of the most interesting things, now that we can see both total retail food as well as total food service behavior, we do see a little bit of variance depending on the occasion or time of day that someone is sourcing, with breakfast being the prime most occasions that are sourced from home, but almost an equally number, still 80+% of occasions being sourced at dinner. Lunch is a little bit more mobile. Some of that is a return to offices. Some of it's just a return to the fact that lunches can be on the go and, we're moving around places, but that from the home. I know I see that when I look at for things like muffins in the perimeter bakery department, for example, creams and creamers in the dairy. Breakfast being at home for a key occasion is an important takeaway of this slide. So let's talk about all of the things that are on the consideration roadmap for a consumer when they go to spend on fresh food. Everything from food and beverage prices being higher. I've already said the word inflation something like 5 times, and we're only 15 minutes in, into this call. What's really key though is inflation. The actual price of something isn't always known. Did you realize that food and beverage prices are statistically 30% higher than they were in 2019? We feel it more than we see it. Because what we do see is lots of shifts and changes, everything from the cost of housing to the cost of credit rising. I mean, the housing situation right now for folks who are trying to move or get a new mortgage or even have rent, that's also weighing into their pocketbook. We know there's been a lot of conversation around weight loss drugs, and we with FMI and Circana have published a lot of change on how that has really affected the marketplace. By the way, the headline of that isn't that it's any one complete change in consumption or change in habit, but it's starting to change the way people think about health and wellness, and specifically weight loss. We've also seen an increase of debt and an increase or a depletion of savings. All that is before we get into the fact that we've seen assortment declines, supply chain constraints, and promotion efficiency declines. That second to the last one has been a big one we've been talking about with Circana. And here's why. Our clients are asking us questions like, hey, why didn't I get as much lift for this promotion as I did year over year? When the actual question behind the question is all of these various things on the journey have made maybe that discount on that shelf at that moment not the most relevant decision point. But we definitely have seen the traditional levers that we have historically pulled, especially in fresh, because we all know that so much of fresh to buy really price, unlike a lot of CPG packaged goods, price ends up being our only lever. If price isn't working and promotion isn't working, we've got to think beyond the basic. What consumers are saying to us right now in 2024, based on our monthly survey that goes out to US decision makers, I should say primary shoppers, is again, we continue to see 95% of Americans concerned about food cost. There isn't a thing that 95% of Americans all agree on anywhere else in the zeitgeist. So this is truly a remarkable result. No, by the way, it's only gone up in recent months as we've tracked that sentiment over time. 70% feel this moment in time is harder to stay on budget than ever, even though we know that the actual ARP, average retail price in food and beverage at retail, has started to come down since December. 85% of consumers think prices are still going up. They think it's too high and they think things are still going up. We're not here to use data to prove otherwise. What they believe, their perception, is reality. We're hitting thresholds. Their behavior is starting to change. So we've tracked this question of, are you making changes? Again, for many, many months now. And we're seeing all-time highs of 84% of people saying, I'm changing my behavior due to grocery prices. And changes are myriad. Changing which store you go to, changing how much items you buy, changing which products you buy, which quality tiers you buy. All of that, the answer is yes, that is happening. In fact, between February and March of this year, we saw an increase of 5 percentage points of the number of people who reported they were changing their behavior in just 1 month. Here's another stat that really surprised me. The people who are making the most changes are our youngest shopping demographic. This moment of pandemic, inflation, and now post-pandemic life is how consumers under the age of 33 are setting their shopping. That is going to have decades-long impact in how we price, market, and promote to these consumers. And remember, as we'll talk about a lot today, and I think a lot this year, younger consumers, specifically those under the age of 40, they're not the same in how they shop and how they meet these changes and moments as consumers over the age of 40. So for example, even in light of everything I just told you, shoppers age 34 to 42, kind of that prime millennial demographic, 51% of them are mixing online and in-store for their groceries. Compare that to the baby boomers, where less than 25% of consumers over age 59 are mixing online and in-store. And the reason is, again, dimensions of value. It's really easy to watch your cart go up. We've all done it, right? When we shop for anything online, you see how big your cart is. You can easily, with no, social anxiety, move things in and out. online is part of their journey and their decision-making process in a way that is disproportionately centered with younger people. One other way that we've seen generational differences play out at Circana is how we eat. So in our recent snacking study and in all of our kind of at-home consumption studies, we've noticed that younger consumers, and again, this is a consumption study, so we can literally get into individual eaters like Gen Alpha, people who are in their teens today or younger. We see that younger consumers, especially when they're thinking about eating as a need state of just what I love to do, they're more likely to have more eating occasions that are part of this. I'm using food to be yummy or reward myself. Younger consumers see food as that in a disproportional basis than older consumers, with the exception of Gen X, who my joke there is Gen X are feeding the Gen Zs and Alphas in treat and reward moments, right? We're literally starting as a society of using food as part of a favorite thing and having this emotional reward relationship with food. That's happening in younger consumers, and our Gen X parents are helping us do that. But the key stat at the bottom is younger consumers who are just forming their eating habits, as well as the parents who are raising them, are increasingly having food be part of yummy and favorite and routine. We think about food differently when we're younger, and older generations don't nearly think about food in that same way. We've covered a lot of this generationally as well, but I just want to remind you that one of the other big differences that we're seeing is snacking, especially as mobility and on the go, and honestly price, is also having a factor. So 46% of Americans eat 3+ snacks per day. Now that's down versus year over year, but it's holding true in the long term, whether we look at pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And ultimately, where we're seeing these occasions have growth is in between meals, and also increasingly snacks are being sourced from retail. Now, mobility of snacks is driving a lot of really interesting innovations, for example, in PM and late night snacking at both food service and retail. It's also seen in fresh specifically, the rise of differentiated offerings that can be consumed quickly at grocery stores as well as at the C-store channel. But the concept of how are we snacking with fresh is as important as how are we making dinner with fresh. So I really want to encourage you to embrace this moment in time where snacking is part of our lifestyle, especially younger consumers. And instead of just saying, hey, I cut this fruit up, it's a snack now. We really have to think about snacking as an occasion. Snacking is a lifestyle. How does the fresh foods we're offering at retail or in food service really meet that moment and show the relevance of snacking as an occasion? Just putting some things in a cup means someone's thinking about your product as a snack. It's really about, again, how are you making that moment relevant and an experience for them? And there's so many examples of that in fresh. I think this is really a moment we can shine. One of the other fundamental changes recently came out of our just released State of Dinner study. I should say, excuse me, Future of Dinner study. So we know that a big moment was snacking. We talked about it. One of the other things, especially departments like meat and seafood, have been heavily connected to is the dinner occasion. With our latest study in 2024, we've further seen consumers lean more heavily toward no prep and fast dinner fixes. Now, the plus minus basically means it was relatively flat with some erosion. The pluses mean things that are increasing. While that's an important thing to understand trends, we see one dish, for example, as well as no prep really having an increase. What is a huge takeaway here for this slide for this audience is we're seeing 60 some odd % of all occasions, especially in an everyday basis, be about speed and low time involvement. But what we've really seen change in each of these formats is people are making trade-offs and decisions. Again, the dimensions of value. So someone might opt for a already cooked, already pulled rotisserie chicken option from the deli, which, by the way, deli prepared meats are up double digits in units. So definitely a part of this trend is having an already cooked, recipe ready, deli prepared food meat, and then maybe making their own side dish from scratch, maybe using a couple different components. Meeting the moment about how someone can combine ingredients to make an end date meal is really a huge macro trend right now, centered in relevance and experience. But don't discount invested dinners. We also see a romance happening on occasion with things like getting together around a charcuterie board. And by the way, there's 18 special occasions centered on food by the average US household. Those time invested dinners are a part of that. We're also seeing a romance happening right now with occasionally people really enjoying prime cuts of meat or using some of those awesome Traeger grills and other high-end appliances they acquired during the pandemic. And on occasion, having that invested dinner be centered around a really quality protein. There's opportunities across the spectrum, but time involvement is key. Now, the other place where time involvement is changing how we behave as an American society with a direct impact in fresh is how we shop. There are 214 trips made to a retail store for food and beverage by the average US household. That is the most we've ever seen at any moment in time. And by the way, it's up versus just last year. These many, many multiple trips actually are 22 more than we saw 3 years ago and 4 more than just 1 year ago. What I mean by that is we are going to the store more often items. And it's important to note, as I'll say in a minute, because we're going to so many stores for just what we need, just when we need it, it doesn't mean we're just buying everything more at the same store we always did. We do see that in this new moment of multiple just-in-time trips to many stores, many times a week, year, month, or year, we see that fresh does make it into the basket much more often than it did before. So we have 147 trips per year per US household for fresh. But our rate of increase is only 11%. So as the total food and bev went up 12%, our frequency in fresh went up 11. Okay, great. We're a rising tide, we're floating with the boat. I guess I said that wrong, but you get where I'm going. What was interesting is when we break this down by individual fresh department, we see that produce has won the moment and is riding this wave disproportionately. Produce is seeing 84 trips annually and is seeing 7 more trips per year on average than 3 years ago. As people are doing just-in-time shopping and buying what they need, when they need it, where they need it, produce is definitely making it into that basket. In fact, as I've told the produce industry recently, I think we could actually use that frequency to drive deeper baskets because as we know, produce has side dishes and snacks and all sorts of different options that really should be in more trips. But unfortunately, the meat and seafood departments are actually seeing less trips than 3 years ago. This rising tide is not floating center of plate proteins boat. That doesn't mean that the meat department, as you'll see in a few minutes, is having sluggish sales. We're keeping borderline flatness year over year in the meat department because of when someone's making dinner or having a really invested time, the meat department becomes a destination. But we're not visiting every department in these small trips. And honestly, because of so many great solutions happening in the front of the store, among other fresh departments like deli, bakery, and produce, people aren't always making it in every trip back to the meat department. That's really a moment where as a retailer, we need to make sure that our total store is driving the foot traffic that we need in this new competitive set, and every department's relevance is being felt on each trip. So speaking of retailers, wanted to update you on where we're seeing year-to-date channels in terms of that total spend for fresh foods. So each of these stack bars looks at 2021, 2023, and then year-to-date, January through April of this year. And as we've done in the past, we have each of the channels of where people could buy retail food and beverage, retail fresh foods in this chart view. Traditional grocery, as we've talked about extensively on these calls, is starting to see erosion in terms of what percentage it makes up of total fresh foods. So we're at 35% of total fresh foods selling through a traditional grocer. That's your traditional multi-departmented supermarket that has things like service deli. Maybe they do or don't have a service butcher, but regardless, it's a multi-department supermarket. Who continues to win share? We've seen this, we've talked about it, but Mass Super. Mass Super is easier to shop than ever. And in this moment where value is a little bit of price and the relevant and the quality and the convenience of shopping at a mass or super center isn't all that different from the relevance, quality, and assortment happening at a traditional grocer, people are opting for where that name on the front means value to them. We're also seeing that club continues to hold its own in the post-pandemic society as a viable channel. And what's so interesting about studying club and fresh foods is, yes, you do need to buy 4 pounds of, avocados versus just buying what you want at a supermarket. But those items and the curated limited selection of assortment that happens at club stores that are incredibly relevant to those members actually is winning. So in some categories, club is much higher than 12%, even though they have far more limited items. The items they choose to have are incredibly relevant to their members. And so there isn't a lot of waste. It's a very efficient way for someone to buy that category. One more call out is we continue to see, while only 4%, still viability in the independent specialty store sector. So even though we're about value, sometimes the most relevant store is a farmer's market, is a cheese shop, is something that's more about experience and quality and fun. 4% of the market and holding is nothing to sneeze at when it comes to specialty stores, and it's an important part to consider. So I'm going to dive quickly through some department performance before we dive into our key topic. First off, when we look at sales year to date, we're going to look at sales in an L50 latest 52 basis ending April for each food and beverage department. Total edible is our proxy for total food and beverage, and you see overall we're at about $811 billion in retail for total food and beverage. Produce and meat and produce and all of our fresh departments actually are really holding their own in this view. When we start to look at change is where it starts to get different. So general food and beverages saw dollar sales growth in the 52-week period, as did produce, deli, bakery, and floral. While in this same 52-week view, the meat department and the refrigerated or dairy department, as well as the seafood department, did not show dollar growth. We also see an uneven unit or volume. Now, in that second bar there, the yellow bar, keep in mind, if a department system of average price per pound, like in meat and produce, we're using volume, and other departments are using unit. It's a little mixed, just keep that in mind. But we use the relevant unit measure for each department. We are seeing that even in a volume unit basis, in light of all this inflation, produce and deli and floral are positive, meaning we're driving more items, not just more dollars in this inflationary environment. So speaking of inflation, what is the price per volume or unit, and how has that changed? When we look at general food and beverages, as well as frozen, they do exactly what you would expect to do if you're a statistician. Prices went up, units went down, dollars went up. But look at the fresh departments being far more interesting in that equation. The meat department didn't see a price increase and yet didn't really have a strong growth dollar. I just mentioned the meat department isn't seeing as much foot traffic. It's also a relatively high price per purchase compared to other departments. That actual rate of price is 4 times higher than when someone buys something from the produce department. Meat and seafood is an expensive endeavor for a consumer. They're thinking about their overall spend, not just of food and beverage, but of everything. Rationalizing and making sure you're using the meat department or the seafood that you're buying is the moment right now. We really have to think about that relevance when we're trying to drive increased traffic to the meat department. Bakery, floral, deli really had price increases, but as I mentioned, they're also holding their own. So one more look on a total department basis. We're going to flip the script, and instead of looking at dollars, volume, and price, we're going to look at shopper behavior. So first off, we're going to look at household penetration. Across all of our departments, except for seafood, we are seeing 99-ish%, if you round, percent of people in the US buying from that department. This isn't a department reach problem in any one of these spaces, except maybe seafood. Dollars per buyer, which is a rate of spend per US household over a 52-week period, is also seeing disproportionate growth. Now, the dairy department has seen some retraction. The meat department only saw about 1% dollar per US household growth. Take a look at that deli department. The average American household is spending 5% more on deli than they were last year, 4% more per household on bakery. Those are really compelling numbers. We also talk a ton lately about what a driver frequency is. Frequency really does show growth, especially in that deli and bakery. Last but not least, we've got, I went one bit too far. Last but not least, I'll just click this through here. We do see unit per sales per trip down, I should say, in most departments. But I want to quickly take a look at category performance before we dive in, before we chat a little bit about Rick's thoughts, and then we move into our deep dive. So first off, many categories we know, that was the department view. When we look at the categories that have added dollars in 2024, what we do see is ground beef and berries continue to really add huge amounts of dollar sales. Furthermore, though, not every category is seeing volume or unit sales, even if they're seeing dollar growth. When we look at the bottom number of categories for change, we do see some categories might have had a dollar erosion like bacon, but they're actually driving more volume. Price isn't the only measure here. And one last point before I want to pause for Rick's thoughts is remember, different generations are not naturally engaged in fresh. Gen Z and millennials are only spending about just over a quarter of their total spend of food and beverage on fresh, and they're eroding. We really have an engagement problem on our hands that we might need to correct because, and Rick, I want to pause for your thoughts on this, we're really seeing that potentially, are we being outmarketed in fresh by center store? Rick, thoughts on that before we turn it over?
Yeah, John had great information on the front part of this deck, but I'm going to go back to that last slide. And if there's an alarm clock that went off when I saw the information, it was this particular slide. So when you look at that Gen Z and millennials, not only are they not as engaged in fresh, but you're actually retracting a little bit. If ever there was an alarm for our industry, that's it. I mean, that is the largest cohort in terms of population and cumulative wealth. Now, individual wealth, obviously Gen X and boomers have it, but because of the sheer numbers, this is where all the dollars are. And so I wonder if the center of the store marketing, because CPG does a tremendous job marketing, has found a better way to resonate with Gen Z and millennials, whereas fresh departments are often commodities. And there's brands in there that do promote, but that not like the CPGs do in the center of the store. And so I always used to say, you can eat out of the meat department and get protein that really retains in the system, or you can eat a protein bar, which most of it flushes out, right? But if I'm being marketed that my protein can come from the bars and that's resonating with me, I'm going to move it in, and it's a snack type environment. The other thing that shocked me was that I thought Gen Z and millennials were much more in tune to the fact that fresh foods have less ingredients, less additives. And so you would think it's right in their wheelhouse, and we're losing them. So that really set off an alarm. And I think we're going to spend a little bit more time in our next episode of Top Trends. And this will be a discussion for the balance of the year. This really shocked me, and it's alarming.
Does lead to our focus topic today, which we didn't want to jump generational immediately, but there's a bigger question behind the question here that Kelly's going to cover next as I pull this up and transition to you, Kel, which is, I think I'm the next two slides, right? And then I go to you, but we really want to talk about this moment in time where things are changing, because there are still pockets of potential. But historically, we've always done things in fresh the way we've done them, right? Baby boomers and Gen X, that's our sweet spot. But for this moment in time, we're going to have to recognize that there's a changing of the consumer guard. So whether we think about the migration and the population changing, which has completely disrupted the flavors and experiences on one side, but on the flip side, it brings with it people aren't as loyal because they might want to see foods and stores and experiences that they were used to up north in the Southeast and in the Southwest. So that this is where I've always shopped really isn't a moment anymore. We have a potential to change the way people shop and bring new ideas to them. We've also seen a change in who we are. Hispanics, as well as other ethnicities and races, are really mixing into the population. Younger consumers don't look like older consumers. They really are much more explorative and open to what is a good tasting food. We also know that even if, as Kelly's going to highlight, while the younger generation doesn't have a lot of spending power today, they certainly are up and coming. But the reality, though, I think, Kelly, if you could bring up, I'll just clear you on the next slide, we've really found that we've got not just a generational issue, kind of a disproportional sales issue as well.
Thanks, John. So, as we really start to think about that future growth, there is no shortage of shoppers out there for fresh departments. Everyone is shopping the fresh departments. But it's not a viable strategy for us to target everybody. We'll end up nowhere. But if we think about what are kind of the disproportionate opportunities that are out there in front of us, we have this small group of our heaviest shoppers. They make up about 10% of a fresh department, and they can contribute upwards of 30 to 40% of total sales. These are the mega influencers of these categories. And what we have traditionally done in the fresh departments is to cater specifically to those needs and their shopping behaviors. And this has been really a winning strategy. If we look here at our 90%, all the other buyers that are not our core 10%, it's just kind of moderate to flat growth. But when we look over at our core 10% of buyers, we're looking at double digits. This is great success. So it really is working. When our core buyers are faced with inflation, they're continuing to spend and invest in the fresh departments. And this is particularly true for bakery and total deli, which is seeing, 14% growth. As well, the produce department is kind of worth pointing out here because there's more of a parity between the two groups. And that's partially driven by lower item ring, just in general compared to other fresh departments, but also there's a perishability factor. It's harder to stock up on these items. And if we really think about how do you efficiently and effectively spend your marketing and trade support dollars, it's far easier to focus on a smaller group. And that if you're able to capture your heaviest shoppers, they're the equivalent to 4 average shoppers. And in the total deli, upwards of 7 people spend. So there's a significant advantage to tapping into these groups. As well, what we're seeing here is it's not just that these heaviest shoppers spend more, they're also far more engaged and invested in exploring the fresh departments. Take, for example, our produce shopper. Our heavy produce shopper annually will look at 31 different categories within just produce. That is nearly double what the typical 90% buyer is looking at with only 17% of categories. So when you have these heavy shoppers that are not just only having their staples in their list, but they're also thinking about what else is new and interesting to discover? What else can I add to my basket? There's a lot of a high bar for engagement to keep them coming back for more. As well, when we think about who are these shoppers, as we personify them, there are some similarities of these heavy shoppers across fresh departments. Upper income is not unexpected. They have more disposable income, higher basket rings. They can afford to purchase more. For our meat and our produce, I don't think this should be surprising. We see our Gen X families. They're at this point in their life where they're at the peak of their consumption. They have the most members. They have older children in the household. They're consuming as much as they can. As well, when we look at total deli and bakery, we have our boomers. And these are a group that have grown and aged with the category itself. But we have to start thinking about the next 5 to 10 years. These Gen Xers and these boomers are going to go through some significant lifestyle shifts. Our Gen Xers are now currently a full household of bustling activity, but they could potentially be empty nesters. Then again, there's also the possibility the kids boomerang back in, but we have to kind of keep that in mind. As well, we have our boomers are going to be shifting from working to being more into the retirement, which will impact their ability to spend as much as they have in the past. So as we think about this, we have to look to the next horizon. The 10% has been a great strategy, but what about tomorrow? Do we need to start looking through the 90%, all of these untapped buyers that are out there to identify maybe they're not the heaviest shoppers today, but they could be tomorrow. So how do we help identify and help them nurture and engage them in these categories? They need to feel seen and recognized, and they need to be able to find the products that meet their needs states and the occasions that they have in mind. Now, the thing we must always remember, though, is we can't treat them as a monolithic group. 90% of all fresh buyers out there are still millions upon millions of people. And they're not all the same, and we cannot treat them the same. So really, success is going to hinge on identifying and uncovering the cohort groups that matter specifically to your business and your audience as a retailer. So if we dive a little bit deeper here into our 90%, as I mentioned, they're not all the same. So we applied a life stage cohort lens to this to really identify what are some key pockets of growth. And when we talk about these pockets of growth, we're not just referring to, are they adding to the overall dollar growth? These groups are disproportionately adding more than their fair share to the growth. And it's not surprising to see that we have our young families and those raising teens as kind of a center and key pocket of growth. They're tapping most of the fresh departments. They're at the center of all of this. As well, though, we can't look and forget about our getting started folks. These are those smaller households that are still getting going in life. There's no children yet in the picture. And they are in contrast to their established workers or other small or household side where there are no pockets of growth for the fresh departments. And right now, these younger cohort groups are offsetting the declines from the older generations as we look across. And as John alluded to, these groups do not look the same as their historic peers. We cannot assume that the millennials in their 30s look exactly like the boomers in their 30s. You know, it is important to recognize that they have different preferences, and these preferences have been significantly shaped by their different values, their beliefs in sustainability, cultural heritage is a factor, their life stage, recognizing, you know, people have had children later on in life, as well as their economic state. All of these things really are impacting what products matter most to them and what products do they look for when they go through the fresh departments. So this is overall, if we were to look at their total fresh spend, all the products together, what products really rise quickly to the top that are distinct for these younger cohort groups. And I think what was most surprising to me was this group spends more on fresh berries, which accounts for 5% of their total fresh spend. They spend more on fresh berries than they do on any protein type within the fresh departments. They outspend beef and chicken on fresh berries. As well, if we look at this as a holistic group, there is a lot of emphasis on health and versatility. A lot of these products have a duality of, are they an ingredient as a part of a meal, or are they being consumed as a snack on their own? And I think when you look at this, you might say hot dog seems like a bit of an outlier if we're talking about health, but we also have to keep in mind that many of these cohorts are raising families. So this is kind of a convenience compromise for them. So we thought it'd be interesting here to do a kind of a double click into really understanding we have these heavy shoppers on one side, we have everybody else on the other, but let's double click into these key cohorts for each of these groups and understand what are some opportunities for shared resonance and what are products that would more deeply engage these particular cohort groups. So if we were to think about meat, we have our heaviest buyers on the left-hand side. And the key cohort here is raising teens. On the right-hand side, for everybody else, we have our young families. And what is interesting here is that the raising teen, our heaviest side, is really focused on those traditional center of plate proteins, the ground beefs, the beef steaks, the pork chops. In contrast to that, our young family is really focused on finding convenient meal and snack solutions, as well as there's an aspect of health. You know, they are all for, if kits offer them a way to shortcut and make things a little bit simpler, they're on board with it. As well, they like the convenience of dinner sausage, but they're leaning more towards the healthier aspect of turkey and chicken. Now, in the middle of our Venn here, we have some shared resonance products. And a key part of what's resonating with both of these family-oriented groups is they're looking for versatile, affordable, and crowd-pleasing proteins. So we have our chicken breasts and thighs, our hot dogs, and our ground turkey. Now, if we click into the next department and into our total deli, there's also some interesting contrast happening here. On the left-hand side, for our heavy buyers, we're looking at our younger boomers. And on our right-hand side, we're looking at our young families for everybody else. And the boomers here, being a smaller empty nester household, they're really looking for convenient meal replacements, whether this is tackling an in-home need or an out-of-home food service need. They're leaning into things like deli soups and salads and sandwiches, as well as they still like the personalization that comes from engaging with counter service deli, making sure that they're getting their turkey sliced exactly how they would like it and getting the right weight that works for their household and their consumption rates. On the right-hand side, our young families here are really looking for ways to enhance their meal. So they're leaning into specialty Parmesan and mozzarellas to make the meal a little more special, a little more flavorful. And in the middle here, we have, again, that's still that desire need for the convenient snack and meal solutions with the sushi and pizza, as well as dips are just a huge part, an aspect of what people enjoy snacking on for both of these groups. Now, if we think about produce, I want to start with the shared resonance products. So our heaviest buyers are our raising teens. On the flip side, we have our young families as a part of our 90%. But in the middle here is really a shared resonance around berries, apples, grapes, and cucumbers. These are family snacking staples. They are healthy and highly portable. So they work for these busy people who are living life on the go. On the left-hand side, when we think about what products are resonating, it's a lot about satiety and affordability for those raising teens. Those potatoes, those bananas, it's quick and easy. It helps everyone feel full. On the right-hand side, I like to think that we see a lot of this limes, mangoes, and melons. Potentially is a little bit culturally influenced by the Hispanic skew of these young families, as they're really looking to bring some acidity and the tropical fruits into the mix. On the last department, I think this is kind of a really interesting dynamic that is happening as we think about our heaviest buyers versus our everyone else. The heaviest buyers, our boomers here, are really focused on traditional bakery items. They're the ones making a sandwich. They're enjoying a cookie, they're having some donuts, they're celebrating occasions with layer cake. On the right-hand side, where we have our getting started, these are our Gen Zs and our younger millennials. They're really about exploring the alternative breads in the bakery set. They're thinking, they're not making a sandwich, they're making a wrap. They're finding products to dip into all of the things that they're buying from the deli set. So it's a really different exploratory aspect to it than others. And in the middle here, we really have, both of these groups can agree that it's important to have a sweet, indulgent treat to make the day better. So they're into mini muffins, sweet rolls, and center store brownies. So throughout all of this, we've kind of pointed out that these generations and these opportunities there are a lot of them, but they're also different from each other. They're not just shopping the products and their mix and assortment differently. They're also shopping for fresh foods from different aspects. So if we do a cut of our top 10% versus everybody else across the channels, what we're really seeing here is that, everybody else, the 90%, is focused on those traditional food, mass and superstore, and club to fulfill a lot of the grocery needs. This speaks to affordability, convenience, finding everything in one place. As well, we have noted in other studies that we have seen these younger generations and families are kind of narrowing the amount of channels they shop. They're trying to make it more efficient and more convenient for themselves. But what's interesting here about our top 10%, because they're so heavily engaged in the fresh categories, they are more discerning. They have a higher bar. They are really taking into account what is the quality of the products, what is the variety of products, what is working for them. And that's why we see this spike towards the specialty stores. And this is primarily driven by meats and delis, where really the quality and variety and the experience of it matters most. So we have some things to consider here. Fresh foods is not growing as fast. And if we continue to kind of operate and sell and optimize the way we have been, there's a potential we're going to end up and maintain this position as we are today. So we have a critical question for everyone to think about. You have some choices. And it's a coin flip, because there are opportunities in both of these sectors. You can choose to continue to find growth within winning and retaining those heaviest buyers, but you can also do something different. So we wanted to wrap up today by giving some quick thought starters on how you could approach either of these groups, depending on what you feel like is the winning strategy for your business, because there is no right or wrong answer. It's just what works best for you. So if we think about winning and retaining our top 10% of our fresh shoppers, it's really going to be important to keep them inspired and reignite all their passions about these categories. And right now, we have the core that we've had for a long time. Within that core, there are a mix of other generations. So how can we identify and accelerate connecting with them via digital marketing, keeping it personalized, having high ROI, and measuring all of that? Always thinking beyond the price. These shoppers are really thinking through the full shopping tool experience. So how can we leverage other things that are out there, whether it's adjacencies, making sure that we're delivering the best quality relevance and experience. As well, we need to think about with these heaviest shoppers, it's keeping them engaged and making sure they expand and add one more item to their trip. They've already shown they love exploring and adding new things. So how can we make sure that every trip is worthwhile? How can we make sure that Quick Trip has a couple more things? And how can we make sure that it's convenient and easy to find those frequent staple items for them? As well, we need to think about how do you excite and delight them? They are very invested in what they're looking at, and they want to make sure that what they're purchasing feels special, valuable, and worthwhile. So what can we do with that experience to make sure that that's paying off for them? And if we start to look at everybody else, There's some focus here is really on one, encouraging more trips as well as helping to expand that basket, but it's really identifying the pockets of potential that matter most. The 90% is vast and deep. So it's really about finding specifically who is your audience for your store or for your product, and helping to do that in a way that is fact-based, that you can measure, test, and learn from. As well, you want to make sure that we are tailoring and speaking directly to them. This is making sure that they feel personalized and that you're speaking to them in the language that matters most, making sure you have the right promotional vehicles to connect with them, and making sure that you're not wasting your important investment against impressions that are not potentially reaching your key buyers. As well, we want to help deepen their basket. This group is not yet as involved and engaged. There's a lot of opportunity to help them find new products, but there's also the aspect of you needing to educate them on how to use that product most efficiently and effectively. So suggestive selling might be your friend. As well, it's important to stand out from the crowd. People are really thinking through where else could I be, and standing out is about branding, variety, exploration, giving them something unique that makes people go, oh yes, I need that product. I need to go to that particular store. So with that, we have one last poll for you to consider. After everything you've seen today, where are your thoughts on, do you continue to play to the core base here, our top 10% that drives sales, or will you think about turning to someplace else for the future? Future building, straddling both, or focusing on these new consumers and new patterns. So we'll give you here a moment to select.
I think while we'll do that, Rick, would love to take your thoughts in closing here as the poll results are coming in on this question of, Gen X and boomers have a lot of spending power today and is a winning strategy. Kind of what's your thoughts to wrap us up here, Rick?
Yeah, I voted for straddle both. I think you always have to deal with your core because they're the driving engine. But I think a lot of the slides that Kelly showed were great opportunities where you intersect and you look at the cohorts to look at those items where you can kind of turn to the new and start to build that up as well. So I'm always more biased towards you can't leave any faction out. Every penny counts at retail. It's a tough business. So I checked off B.
I agree. But I would say that I think if anyone thinks they're doing great at B, I think there's probably not. Because one of the things I want to point out at the end, I totally agree. The opportunity in the moment needs to be B. However, I think that's one of the things that's hurting traditional grocery. I think we think we're doing a good job trying to, play to the base, but then we also think we're attracting new. And the biggest thing that I've seen year to date that colors all the trends is that trip traffic. We're making more trips to more stores, but that doesn't mean your local grocer is winning all of that foot traffic. And honestly, neither is Mass Super, neither is Club, neither is C-Store. No one's winning all the traffic. But we have found in studies fresh, right? Lots of good questions in the chat, by the way, about frozen and center store. To remind everyone listening on Circana.com, we definitely have other publications about, those departments. This is on fresh. And it looks like most agree with us, but it is really interesting about, building the base, focusing on new consumers, because one of my favorite questions in the chat that I answered individually, and we'll just end with this, was, the classic question of, do we just expect that younger generations, as they age, as they become homeowners, as they have children, will just naturally become like baby boomers? And I think the answer to that, in my opinion, is no. This is a society where they've been snacking forever. They've been marketed to forever. I mean, my kids are 17 and 14, and they can name their top favorite brands of snack foods, but they can't name their favorite variety of apple. So I really think this generation won't just naturally buy more fresh. Curious for your thought on that, Rick.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I go back to the slide where we talked about the value proposition. And the one bucket that really stands out to me as relevance is how do we make fresh relevant to these younger consumers? And how do we look at their lifestyles and what's important to them and make that resonate? And we really need to double down our efforts in the way we communicate to them in these fresh departments. I think you're right when you say that we probably check off the middle box, but we're probably not doing everything we can on the new. We try a couple things and say, okay, we've addressed that. But I absolutely agree with that. And I would go back to say, look at some of those items that are doing really well. So we talked about berries. And, you know, when you think about berries, how relevant is that to a young consumer who's doing smoothies, who's snacking, who's health conscious, who's on the go? Is that item really relevant to them? Absolutely. So how do you create that relevance in other departments and other items?
Totally agree. Same thing. We're seeing cottage cheese of a moment with younger consumers, or the way berry is grinds, by the way, all grinds are doing well, incredibly versatile and relevant. I just want to give one last shout out to Kelly. I know we're at time, but Kelly Krumholz is the wind beneath the wings of this. And also, again, Rick, as always, so thankful for you, excited for Fresh Forward, and thankful to everyone who joined us. So thank you all so much. We'll see you in August.